Good morning, Todd Mackey here. Wanted to share with you something of recent importance in today's world. I mean, in the last 10 years, this currency has become available to you called Bitcoin. Bitcoin being the number one, the first, the primary coin that uses what's called the cryptocurrency or a public ledger protocol. And how that works is pretty sophisticated, but what most people ascribe to once they obtain a certain Bitcoin, they would like to what's called HODL. Now, I just wanted to share this with you first because this is what I find interesting in the language. So you got hold on for dear life, HODL. I believe it was way back in the 2010s when some guy was typing on a forum where he actually accidentally misspelled it from hold to HODL. But it caught on and it's become a cryptocurrency saying. So everybody uses that word now to basically describe exactly what it is, holding on for dear life. Now, when you look at cryptocurrency, it's a cryptographic currency that's not private, right? So it's cryptographic, not necessarily. The cryptographic part is the hash rate, the hashing of the mining power when we have this giant computer board that's going to calculate everything and the algorithms to crack the code for Bitcoin. Essentially, it's then become public ledger. So every little transaction that you make, whether it's buying a cup of coffee or a couple of pizzas, it's all done on the public ledger. And that's the way that people can verify that the hash rate has been correctly annotated in the mining algorithm. And it's computed way back. I mean, you have, being that it's a 10-year-old protocol, you have at least 200 gigabytes of blockchain to download onto your computer. Now, when you download this onto your computer, essentially you're downloading all of the different transactions that have taken place on this public ledger. So you essentially do have the public ledger protocol on your computer verifying all the transactions that are taking place. And because it's distributed, you have multiple computers that partake in this transaction of Bitcoins. And not only is it going to be from your computer to their computer, but it's going to be hashed every 10 minutes on what's called the blockchain, essentially, so that you have a picture after 10 minutes showing that your transaction was verified. And it takes 6 signature transactions in order for it to be verified. So you can imagine why it takes so much energy, because it's so secure. Now you have other protocols like Litecoin, which is a pretty nice code base. It's a little bit shorter hash rate. Instead of 10 minutes, it's down to 2.5 minutes. So the relay time is a lot faster to get your transactions completed. And then you have Ethereum. Ethereum is more of it's a proof of work algorithm like Bitcoin and Litecoin, but they're moving to what's called proof of stake. Now, proof of stake, essentially you're not using the giant mining resources that are eating up all the electricity. You're essentially using game theory, which kind of more or less verifies the network, secures the network, and transacts and through various nodes and makes sure that the ledger is secure. Now, when you go to something like Monero is a very interesting blockchain because it's private. So there's a few cases about money, and one of those is fungibility. Monero is completely fungible. So one of the things about Monero is it uses ring signatures or ring CT, and you cannot tell who the transaction is being sent to. All you know is that a transaction had occurred at that particular time and on the blockchain, and that it was verified through the ring CT code base. And now you have Decred. Decred is an interesting feature of blockchain as well because it uses what's called the proof of work style of mining as well as the proof of stake style of staking, which they are moving to Ethereum, right? So essentially each of these has its own blockchain. Monero, Decred, Ripple, and JP Morgan Coin. Decred has its one blockchain. It's never been forked, and it's not likely to get forked because it uses the 60% of its hash rate through proof of work, and then the other 40 through proof of stake. And how that works is when people stake their coins, they put them up for an extended period of time, and when they put them on a node, which is basically a computer, they verify by sending the transactions to the computer, making sure that in the past or the history of the transaction basis that it's actually been covered. And so it's not a fraudulent transaction going into the network. And when you have all of these different computers on the network colluding, or basically conceding that yes, this is a verified transaction, then you can have the transaction further verified through the mining process of the other 60%. Because it's a mined coin, it gives you a reward. So you essentially are rewarded for mining by a distribution of coins. You're also rewarded for staking, and that's not only with Decred, but that's also with Bitcoin, Litecoin, and some of these other coins here. I did want to point out a couple of interesting coins that are technically privatized blockchains. One is centralized, in other words, that it's contained within a certain structure, and that would be Ripple, also known as XRP. If you were to purchase Ripple, you're basically purchasing a stake of somebody's company. So if this company put out this blockchain and then they have another company that kind of uses the blockchain to make money, it's kind of considered a security in the eyes of the historical financial gurus you talk to. So Ripple being a security and having its blockchain 60% owned by one company is not really a decentralized currency. So when you're looking at these codes and you see, all right, all these codes are open source, they're on the blockchain, they're for everybody to download from various sources like GitHub or their particular bitcoin.org or litecoin.org, wherever you could find these code bases, you can download them, they're decentralized. I have not yet seen one for Ripple, okay? JP Morgan coin, perfect example of a privatized blockchain. 100% of its coins are owned by the company JP Morgan, which is a banker, and essentially it's a banking coin. It competes with Ripple in the realm of being fast transaction, borderless payments with actually very cheap transaction fees. So therefore you have specific service-oriented blockchains that are either completely privatized or partially privatized. And with the completely privatized blockchain of JP Morgan, they say, oh, we're just gonna issue coins back from one bank to another bank and call that our currency. They could be considered a stable coin. A stable coin means that it's pegged to a certain dollar amount, so they would have to have a certain number of dollars in reserve for the number of coins that are out there for it to be transacted as such. So if it's pegged to the dollar, then they would, and they have 100,000 coins, that means they would have to have 100,000 coins on reserve in a bank account somewhere. So the JP Morgan coin is backed by the dollar, apparently between their member banks and banks that participate in the JP Morgan system. Ripple, on the other hand, is a little bit more complex in their nature. They don't really use the XRP token that's traded so much to send payments. They have their internal network of blockchain transactions that they actually use. They have multiple different blockchains rather than just the one that's publicly traded called XRP. As I mentioned, is more than likely a security. And then Monero is privatized. An interesting thing about Monero, they can actually mine on cell phones. They can mine on browsers. So if you were to open up your browser and type in a search engine term, and then say for instance you downloaded like an ActiveX control or something that could have picked up the Monero bug, it could actually be mining Monero on your computer and you wouldn't even know it. It might slow it down a little bit, but when you have thousands and thousands of computers mining for Monero, it potentially makes somebody a profit, and I believe it's a virus. So you have those sneak or stealth miners like Monero, or you have the big Bitcoin miners like the S9, which is put out by Bitmain for Bitcoin. And there's a lot of different ways to jump into this rabbit hole, but if you ever wanted to get into it, just realize that it's a lot more complex than just the money. Money is just one part of the technology, and it's more of a feature of the technology. And to have the money and the technology intertwined into one is what's really intriguing in this instance, because never before in history have you been able to transact online with just currency without an intermediary. And for that not to have an intermediary and not be copied, meaning you can't just copy and paste the code and then you have double payments. It's like it solved the double spend problem. So it's a monumental time in history that's been worked out since I've researched it back to, I believe it was the early 80s or late 70s when this double spend problem has been researched since. And it's actually been before that when computers were really coming online and trying to figure out, well, can we do this? And sure enough, they figured it out in the 80s and then finally put it into code using proof of work in the 2000s. So there's been a lot of advancements in this technology. 2009 was a monumental year for it because right in 2008 you had the crash, right? The stock market crashed, the economy was falling, the housing bubble was suffering its repercussions that year, and then the following year, 2009, was like the phoenix rising out of the ashes, and you have this Bitcoin and the Satoshi Nakamoto character, or a group of characters that came up with the idea, essentially put in place this system that's meant to replace the old system, which is currently, has been failing. Many people, due to inflation, due to some of the cost structures. I mean, it's not just in the US. I'm not talking about the US, but the Venezuelan government has adopted cryptocurrency. In particular, they have a private blockchain called Petro, but the Bitcoin blockchain is what the Venezuelans prefer because they cannot trust their Bolivar, I believe, which is their currency that they had in place. So due to the massive inflation, if they had bought Bitcoin at the time when it was $20,000, they would have been better off than if they had just kept all of their Bolivars. So it just goes to show the drastic nature and the instability of certain financial systems when they're not correctly used through their governments and through their central banks and so forth. So big issues that Bitcoin solves is just the serious economic inflation idea that some people have to endure in major issues like Zimbabwe. For instance, in Zimbabwe, they have 1,000% inflation. They even have $1 trillion bill. I mean, $1 trillion bill. So it goes to show that it's fails in some parts, and that's where Bitcoin steps in and can be replacing some of those failed systems, as well as take away the need for a bank. For instance, if you just have a cell phone, all you need is an app on your phone that holds the code base or the private keys for your blockchain, and then you can download that app and hold Bitcoin, hold Monero, hold Ethereum, you can hold Litecoin. Expect those speedy transactions to be placed and then the people to get paid immediately within just a couple of minutes. So it's pretty phenomenal innovation that has yet to be really fully embraced, and I think that people are too focused on price rather than the technological aspects, and that's what I wanted to bring out in this episode of my visit with you today. So God bless you, thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you later.